have to really refer back to Lewis Carroll's last book written, that nobody, it's his least well-known book. And it's not known for a reason, because he not only ridicules the project that is happening at the turn of the 20th century, and by ridiculing it, he's likening it to making a one-to-one map of the world, right? You know, and that's crazy. You know, you make a map that is the same size as everything. But think about what our surveillance system is doing today. Not only do we have a one-to-one map of every entity, but we are building volumes of information according to each of those entities and each of the parts of those entities, because, you know, my blood pressure results are going to be very different to my heart rate and everything else, that all the biodata, and whether or not a wearable can actually create significant information, or whether or not it's just absolute crap information. And I mean, I've done a few experiments, and I would suggest that a wearable object or a mobile phone has no way in hell of generating biodata that is actually relevant to a true to life rendering. And I mean, if anyone's done any research with you know, blood pressure, it fluctuates and changes so dramatically. It's really only possible to do a manual reading to actually understand what is actually going on with blood pressure. So, I mean, all this biodata is just a whole architecture of information that, you know, some muggles will think is absolutely true, and, you know, they'll buy the latest wearable for $1,000, and they will think that, you know, that blood pressure reading is true, and it might be way out. I mean, the experiments that I've done with my elderly mother, because I got her a wearable, I thought, oh, you know, this would be really easy if we're just recording her blood pressure all the time. It's got no correlation to the machine that we've got, and that machine's got no correlation to the manual method that you need to use. So, you know, they're trivial indications of something that might be needing a closer look. But people are taking it for granted that this information is actual true. It's like a true record of your physiology. Just as, you know, all the experiments that were done in the 90s, I mean, so much was happening in the 90s. Persinger's experiments with, you know, being able to articulate a brain state to the point that you could imagine that you were being raped and seduced by fucking aliens, extraterrestrials. Now, he was working with Richard Dawkins and Susan Blackmore, both of whom are members of edge.org. And Susan Blackmore began her career as an investigator of paranormal events.
When did you first? And then, when did you first start hearing of like edge events?
I didn't really start hearing about them until it all exposed with Epstein, but I knew all the authors. I'd studied all these authors. I mean, they were, you know, David Deutsch and all of them. They were all the people you had to read if you were remotely interested in cosmology. But, you know, you had to read much more than what was popularized. I mean, getting access to Hugh Everett's work is incredibly difficult. Getting access to John Nash's work, incredibly difficult. Getting access to a lot of the significant information at the time was incredibly difficult. And yet, before, say, You know, something seemed to happen around 2001. Something happened. You know, 911, the clarion call. I mean,
Yeah, there's a lot that happened in 2001. There's a lot that happened.
2001 is an incredibly significant point. At the time, on that day, I was coming back from a conference in Scotland. So, I mean, I'd just given all of my work and had an amazing engagement with a number of scientists and mathematicians and people. Robert Lomas was there, for example. I mean, he was most interested in my work, and he was quite willing to show me or give me access to all of the Masonic information that he had access to, and was wanting to offer me to go to Rosslyn Chapel, but I couldn't because I had commitments in England at the time, and was going to be traveling home sooner.
What do you posit is in the like Masonic information that is hidden away?
Beg your pardon?
The information, like the Masonic, what the Masons know. What is it that you can posit? Is there? What do you think it is? Is it just more data from?
Look, I think that the system of Masonry is, like many of these systems, a way of embodying knowledge so that it can be preserved. It's heavily leaning towards a very strong Kabbalistic influence, which comes through from the first, second century AD. It's not really early. And what Crowley did to it in the early 20th century, it just is, you know, it doesn't matter what people say about anything. If you set them up as a guru or a teacher or someone who's got a high distinction of knowledge, or you're illuminating them as a grand advocate of truth, they can say or do anything, and that's just another veil over the actual facts that remain very heavily mystified. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter whether Crowley thinks he decoded the Kabbalah, and I don't believe he did from everything that I've read about his work. I don't believe that's possible. But a lot of people do believe he decoded it. And so the Kabbalah is not the ancient books written in the first millennium, you know, the first few centuries AD. It's really to do with what Crowley presented, or what the Rosicrucian school started to present after the end of the 19th century. Now, people don't realize that Champollion, he only decoded 7 hieroglyphs, right? And there are many.
Yeah.
Right? He only decoded 7. The rest was an educated guess. And that has been a really big issue for ever since, because Gardner and Gardner's method of distinguishing different categories of hieroglyphs, for example, has become the norm in terms of researching hieroglyphs. And, you know, there are many, many problems that remain unresolved. I mean, Claggett's work, Marshall Claggett, probably is the author of the most voluminous study of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and Egyptian science. And unfortunately, I bought all of Claggett's books in about 2014, and I was I'd finished reading all of them, and it was really, really hard going because, it's complicated work. And I was just about to write a thesis on it in correspondence to the matrix that the construction of the geometry that I had been working on. And then my house flooded. So I'm afraid my library got taken out completely, and things went a bit pear-shaped after that. But those books were really significant, and it made me realize that Crowley's work was very much associated to the work of Alan Gardner. He was a good friend. They were good friends. His interpretation of hieroglyphs is contrived from Alan Gardner's representations. I don't have, having cut my teeth on mysticism, I have no respect for anything that mystifies the facts that are the foundations of our knowledge system. And that's what mysticism is to me. The word speaks for itself. And so the emergence of, I remember when Amit Goswami wrote The Conscious Universe, I think it was called. And, being an Indian national, there was a huge flourish of nationalistic interest in that. Oh my God, Amit Goswami, he's telling everybody that, the quantum physics is embodied by ancient Egyptian mysticism. Ooh, we are the one. We are the civilization on this planet that has everything you need to know about knowledge, because we are the closest approximation to quantum physics, according to whom? New Agers from the 1960s, who were a generation divorced from the mindset that literally ended at the turn of the century. At the turn of the century, you had Felix Klein, Henry Poincaré, all of these extraordinary mathematicians really jumping up and down in excitement because they were wanting to unify the intuitive with the analytical process. So that's literally saying the visible and the intelligible are married. We need both. So that it's like saying, these are two aspects of our knowledge system, and we need to respect both, because without both, we have something that is vulnerable to manipulation, vulnerable to, something like Murdoch Press giving you some popularized rendition of what some person who's married to a psychoanalyst and is a student of ethnology or mythology or anthropology comes up with in terms of their interpretation of scientific experiments that have foxed the greatest minds on the fucking planet for decades. And yet these kids that are, reading mythology and anthropology and ethnology. I mean, Richard Dawkins is an ethnologist. He is not a scientist. He's a social scientist. And there's a very, very big difference, because once you start looking at social science, which is, your political economy, it's, your interpretation of mythology, it's, the difference between a female anthropologist going into an ancient culture and retrieving information from female people the difference between that and the historical information that came from all the male anthropologists that never even dawned on them that the females of the species would have anything of interest to add to anything at all about the information that was being used by the men, because, you know, in their heads, it is men's work. Everything is men's work, because the female is not only considered so passive that she doesn't move or have any action or have any influence, and is, you know, sinister and moist and all of the identifications that the yin yang throws upon her. You know, there's no reason to call nighttime female. I mean, that's the I Ching is about the ratios of day to night. So, you know, and I'll let you into a big secret. The
Oh, they're telling you not to.
The yin yang symbol, the yin yang symbol is as old as the second millennium AD.
Mm-hmm.
AD. So when the Chinese with bricks are projecting this idea that they embody the most ancient civilization and that they are the creators of a literate construct, and that they are the first creators of a manuscript tradition, and that they are the first creators of paper. I mean, this is what is popularized about China in their nationalistic appeal to, you know, the concept of a civilized state rather than a corrupt colonizing dynasty or dynastic tradition, which constantly takes the information away from the people, puts it in repositories that are only accessible to the elite, kills the intelligentsia or forces them to flee. I mean, this is the modus operandi. I mean, this is, you could attribute this to, well, it is. And I mean, there's two people out of the 7 sages of ancient Greece that are most important. One's Thales of Miletus and the other's Bias of Priene. There were only 7 sages, and I believe that there was only one generation of the great sages of ancient Greece anyway, because you don't have any information about any other generation before or after these 7 men that would go and meet together and try and work out how to deal with certain things, given that they had the knowledge system in hand, right? So one of the objectives that Herodotus talks about is, you know, what to do with the battle at Halys River, which had been going on for 6 years. It's unstoppable, and it's really significant, and it's affecting everybody. So, you know, they're all having a bit of a meeting and talking about it, and they all have the knowledge, which is in the hands of the elite, the sages, those who were wearing the completed fabric, who had studied the linguistic and numerical system from the astronomical base, right? From ancient Egypt to Plato. So they had it from Plato significantly. Even before Plato, they had the knowledge. It's just that Plato is the first one who actually tries to articulate it in a way that doesn't get him into too much trouble. And I mean, I was previously trying to say that, you know, we can see his information in Timaeus being his last book, that comes after the 7th letter, that comes after the Republic, and you know, most people on Wikipedia will say we don't know when these books were written, but you can see, if you understand the knowledge that's in them, you can see that one comes before the other. So, the Republic comes before the seventh letter. What is the seventh letter telling us? It's telling us that his own family, who were the aristocrats, who had been deposed in the experimental rendering of a federal republic, right? So the kings and queens were deposed of their power. All of that hierarchy of aristocracy was stripped from their power, and they became the tyrants. And that was his own family group. Mm-hmm. And he tells us this. And he's really shocked. And he is probably feeling very responsible because he wrote the fucking Republic, didn't he?
Yeah.
And the Republic was based on this idea of a community of, I suppose the Republic is, it is the Pythagorean sort of school of, a community where there are elders which have the power to elevate or lower anyone else. They control marriages without anybody realizing that they're controlling marriages. They're articulating things in society as a sort of hidden elite. So, the machinations of that hierarchy flow down from a magisterial elite. So if you're seen to be a nasty person who's in a rich family, you can be deposed of your power, and that power can go to someone who's a much better sort of person, who's got perhaps a greater insight to things, that if you leg them up and give them certain information, they'll do better than the rich person who's an idiot or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, this arrangement of the society from a hidden elite, it's not just the Greeks, it's in the Indian tradition, it's in the Chinese tradition, it's in the Egyptian tradition, it's in all of the traditions, because the knowledge system's really complex. It's really fucking complex.
And often kept and hidden from the masses. So
yes, why? Because knowledge is a weapon, or can be a weapon, only if the greater number are disenfranchised. Mm-hmm. Because if you tell the people what the magician's trick is all about and how to do it, there is no trick.
The little see-through Randy.
Yeah, so if you, and this is why Plato was really freaked out about, this concept of Chronos. We don't need another god of time, particularly of time. We need everybody to be schooled. The greater number needs to be given the science of time. Because without the science of time, your knowledge system, and if you don't allow your people to have access to the knowledge system that supports their civilization, they remain a colonized body. Mm-hmm. They remain a disenfranchised body. They remain children.
Yeah.
They remain subject to a higher authority, which is not God. It's just people doing God's work. This is, and then the people doing God's work are not all bad people, although some don't have any understanding of the knowledge system at all.
But you mean that you mean that as not in they're doing the work of a good and beautiful God, but they're doing work instead of God.
Well, this is the thing, like if somebody's got the power in a religious framework to affect change, but their education and this is as relevant as it is to someone who's brought up in science without any interest or knowledge of theology or what happens with religion. So it works both ways. If you've got someone brought up within a construct that is blinkered to the opposition, I mean, science and religion are always counterposed. Art and science is always counterposed. So, you know, if you are an artist and you're trying to discuss with a scientist, or you're an artist, a creator, and you think that you know where things should go and what things should be like, but you don't have all the important knowledge that the scientists are struggling with, because scientists struggle with information. I mean, it takes a long time to come to terms with all the different codes and covenants and heuristic devices, and, you know, what is a heuristic device and where does that device come from, and what is the technology that we are using, the instruments of our knowledge system, and how are those in play. And funnily enough, the history of technology is where the fine arts is very, very, very significant, because you learn about the history of architecture and the elements of design. You learn about the camera. You learn about the camera obscura and you know, all the methodologies that were in play. You learn about clockwork machines and so on in fine arts, not in sciences. But these are sciences. So, you know, when someone like me makes the mistake of wanting to expand my knowledge and go from fine arts and studying alchemy and mythology and anthropology and, you know, sacred geometry and all of these mystical systems, and I make the mistake of wanting to become a proper philosopher because I've got jack of the art world so much with the way they treated me and with the way they humiliated significant people who the students wanted to come and speak to them, and the way that they were controlling information as if they knew more about science. I mean, this is the interesting thing. The people who have blocked me, they're English teachers, not science teachers. They're art teachers, not science teachers. They're idiots that have written a thesis on alchemy and demolished it as something that is just, you know, a precursor to everything else without really understanding. And I mean, fuck, I thought I understood alchemy when I met Sheila. You know, this is the thing about lifelong education. What I understood of alchemy when I met Sheila served me well to unpack a whole lot of information about, you know, the hypersphere and the hypercube and hyperstructures and the difference between that structure and the Persa Fortunatus, which that was my trip. I was following the Persa Fortunatus and taking it right back to history and exposing all of these wonderful things that were contained in Rosicrucian documents, and exposing that they knew these complex structures, and exposing what Jung brought forward in all of his publications on alchemy. And what those designs were, which some of which come from the Chaldean and Babylonian sources, and they're really complex cosmographs that the Rosicrucians were privy to. Others were, you know, the traditional motives of alchemy, but I think that Jung made a radical mistake. If it was a mistake, I don't know whether it was on purpose, but he considered the shadow to be the shadow of the psyche. It's not the shadow of the psyche. You know, the shadow is our shadow, everyone's got a shadow that falls upon the ground. You know, to associate that with the evils and the paranoias and the you know, the hysteria of the female, which is very much what the subject matter of the day was about. You know, how do we deal with the hysteria of the female?
Again, something
And
that
what
was
is the
developed
hysteria?
through the 60s and 70s quite heavily
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And you know, it is quite, now it's really legitimate to talk about Jungian art and Jungian therapy. Go back 20 years and it was like anathema to a, you know, it was like the worst thing you could even mention in an academic field, that you're interested in Jungian therapy, because, you know, they were all, and partly what is that to do with? Because they didn't want anyone to be looking at alchemy. And when I say they, there is obviously a they and them that are still working in the background, trying to work out how we navigate moving forward, because, you know, we do keep taking the cutting edge from those who offer the information. And it doesn't matter what happens to those people once the information is given. And you know, there's a whole history of demoted mathematicians and scientists that find themselves living on their own in a derelict situation with no funding, no love, no support. Felix Klein, it happened to him, because, you know, he's published everything. Everybody knows everything that he's saying. It's not relevant anymore that we shed a light on him, because shedding a light on him is going to expose the principles of the knowledge system that gives our culture the leading edge, or our corporation the leading edge. It's going to expose the very information that is our trade secret. And we need it to remain a trade secret, because if the greater number knew,
everybody would have silk.
Poof, it all goes poof. So, you know, what does that mean? It means that worshipping the phallus is a big mistake. It's like you're stuck on the first rung.
You're
really stuck on the first rung. You know, you are so stuck on tantric sex and experiencing the flooding of your mind with extraordinary chemistry that can then give you some insight into the Merkaba or some strange geometric shapes and forms, and that's the only way you can realize these things, because in esoterica we're constantly told that enlightenment is something that happens when you shut your eyes and don't gather any data and assume that there is no objective truth, and work only with what is on the inner what is produced without you engaging in the world, literally. Like, this is what enlightenment is supposed to be. Shutting your eyes, sitting on your bum, meditating. I mean, look, I used to do it myself. I know what anapana means, you know, but don't sit in a really uncomfortable position. More anapana, and you're fighting the discomfort of your body. Lie down, for fuck's sake. Enjoy the ride. Feel what it's like to resist the impulse to move. Feel like what it's like to resist the desire to scratch yourself or relieve that, you know, that feeling of a hair falling on your skin, or, you know, the feeling that your leg is uncomfortable. You are still resisting those indications that really fight with you when you're sitting in a fucking lotus position trying to fucking do more anapana because your body's in really, really big pain. You know, you're really fighting with that while you're trying to experience, you know, these extraordinary inner visual images, which are brilliant, you know, that you get to see, you know, the primordial darkness and the idea that there's this little drop of water that happens, you know, and you can, it's like, oh, or you get to see, you know, a manifestation of a Buddha that then starts dissolving like sand, just, you know, the winds come in and the image is just dissolving in front of you. I mean, you get to see all of these things. But if you were lying down, not only would you get to see them all happening, but you'd also have a really fucking extraordinary tantric experience that blows your fucking socks off and makes you realize that you don't even need to touch yourself. You don't even need to be in the room with another person. You certainly do not need a guru to be fucking you. You know,
the way the guru takes away your information and your knowledge. Yeah.
And I mean, I know people, not myself, that have been fucked up really badly by gurus. Well, actually, I could say that I've been fucked up by gurus, but I've gotten out of situations because I've been a little bit more discerning, perhaps. But you know, if I could say something about my worst traits, is that you know, the more I know about this extraordinary knowledge system, the more I know about humans being, first and foremost, we're scientists, you know. If we hear some big crash, we're not going to sit on our bum and go, you know, oh, I want to manifest something that counteracts that. We're going to go and open the door and go, oh, what was that? We're going to run out. We're going to say, what was that? You know, oh, what's the evidence that's left behind? What created this? What, you know, these are the where, why, what's, who's, you know, this is what we are innately. We're not first and foremost creators, because if we were, how would we know how to create a complex machine? You know, creation comes after we've worked out the knowledge system and we start to understand what we can do with things and what happens when you are ingratiated with a space-time science. I mean, it's a science of space-time that is first and foremost present in the most extraordinary revolution of information. And that revolution comes on the back of wanting the greater number to be inducted, not the less. That's what they were revolting against. You know, from 10,000 BC to 4,000 BC, that knowledge system was in play. No one was allowed to make shit. Nobody was, you know, they were all interested in stargazing and they would have their time circles, and, you know, it was a very elite, you know, when you're talking about elite, that's really elite shit. When you've got a group of people doing astronomy and not wanting anyone else to know about anything to do with it, that's really elite, right? So when you have this extraordinary revolution where they're not only wanting to tell everybody, they're wanting to, you know, not only create a language system that's really, really, really complex, they're willing to make structures like a fucking pyramid. You know, they're not doing that by enslaving everybody. Because, you know, when I first started to look at the first pyramids, and I was really wanting to understand what happened then, because, you know, Egypt was in distress. Egypt was being threatened from the north and the east. Their whole civilization was under threat, and they didn't know what to do. And the pharaoh didn't know shit, right? He's freaking out. What are we going to do? So what does he do? He calls on all the people of knowledge to meet and discuss what we need to do to save the nation. And then you get the prophecy of Neferti. Again, Neferti. Neferu. He was the pharaoh. The information comes from a person called Neferti, and the prophecy of Neferti tells us that we need to return to the foundations of Ra. You know, that's because we are being attacked by agents from the north, from the east. Unless we return to the foundations of Ra, which basically means, you know, educate as many people as possible in what these foundations of the linguistic system and the linguistic code mean. Unless we return to that, we're fucked. Mm-hmm. We lose our knowledge system, we lose everything. And you know, this is really pertinent to today's times, because we are on the cusp of losing our knowledge system completely. I mean, we've already lost the human integrity of the human genome. And the reason why we lost it is because our knowledge system has been corrupted without revision since 1960. And you can see what needed revising, because the revision happened in crystallography, but it didn't flow on to topological based structures. So basically, the generation of shapes and forms all happens simultaneously. There's a basic construct, which is an octahedron. The octahedron is reiterated in a vast complex of two measures, two matrix constructions interconnected. So you could say it is an isodual, iso meaning measure, dual meaning two, matrix construction that leads to a rendering of space-time science that is more to do with electromagnetism as a base system, rather than this notion that there are five fundamental forces, the first of which is gravity. Now, that sentence is in the introduction to Newton's Principia Mathematica, where he says, you know, in other words, he says, you know, I wish I could talk about the attractive and repulsive forces, but I'm told that we have to follow Papu the Alexandrian, who literally plagiarizes everything out of Plato, Timaeus. There's nothing that Papu really, you could say he provides a utilitarian product informed by the best, okay, as does Euclid. A utilitarian product giving you all the information that your general population, all they need to know to continue surveying the land, you know, developing the land, developing technologies and so on. And so you withhold the actual facts, you give them all the necessary information that they can work with themselves, and things go on until the knowledge system outgrows itself. And then you have to have some new revolution. And that's always a period of great vulnerability, because you have just spent a few hundred years simplifying and generalizing your knowledge system to include many, many more people in into the works of making things and becoming little companies in their own right, you know, making and producing products and services, which is what we all do. But how do we navigate every revolutionary step when our knowledge system outgrows itself and we need to give more information to get beyond that hurdle? And how do we do that when we really don't want to tell anyone that we've been withholding really significant information for a long time? But, you know, how long? You know, we withheld information in new nations. I'm referring to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, because the publications in America about organic chemistry were really good publications, and they provided information about Fisher projections and what that tool did to the geometrical system used by René de Haas, which is straight, they didn't say it came from astronomy, but they gave you enough information to say that the whole edifice of material science uses the same structural foundations. So organic chemistry is going to use the same structural foundations as everything that was in play with the material science before it. And that means that Bravais' crystallography was now defunct in 1960. Bravais' crystallography, he was working with radiographic, capturing information in radiographic signatures and so on. And he proposed a seven-fold system, which is really only conforming to 7 rays of the rainbow, you know, 7 rays of Alice Bailey, 7 rays of fucking everything, the 7 sages, you know, the 7 modes, the 7 seas. 7 is a significant number, but not for the way a lot of people think of it. It's significant, but because it's really hard to draw a 7-star polyhedra, just as much as it's really hard to draw a 5-star polyhedra. And all the star polyhedras are really, really hard to draw unless you know the nesting of hexagons to be able to find your significant points on the circle to inform your star polyhedra. So, you know, 7 is significant. And when in Australia you've got 7 pointed stars all over your flag, that's telling people, you know, you understand how to draw a 7 pointed star. That's a hard thing to do. It's easier to draw an 8 pointed star. It's easier to draw a 6 pointed star. It's easier to draw every other star apart from the 5, the 7, the 9, the 10, the 11, the 12. All of those star systems or star polyhedra are actually quite complicated unless you have other methodologies, unless you are, you know, working on protractors of information and, you know, you're dividing things and so on. I mean, if you've got the matrix geometry, it's really easy. And the difference between the matrix geometry and, say, something like Descartes is simply that the point in the center is not 0. That's the only difference. I mean, Descartes, wonderful what he did. I mean, we refer to the Cartesian split between, you know, spirit and matter, but that's not necessarily Descartes. It's more Aristotelian metaphysics, you know, the split between physics and metaphysics. And then, you know, describing physics as all of the physical kingdoms, and anything that is immaterial, like the analemma, is subject to question. So anything that's metaphysical is subject to question because we can't see it. And so when you have, you know, the popular notion, seeing is believing, no. Seeing is not believing. because what appears to be true is often counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, it's intuitive, and what's counterintuitive is true. It's really fucking complex shit. Like, this is not simple stuff. The mindset is not simple. We can only have democracy, according to Plato, if the greater number are inducted into the science of space-time. And I actually agree with him. Democracy does not come until the greater number are actually inducted into the knowledge system. And I don't think there's ever been a day or ever been a society or ever been a dynasty that has wanted to induct the greater number into the science of time, because that is blasphemous to the covenant of colonization. And what is colonization? It's taking possession of the resources. So what is a resource? It's all of the minerals, it's all of the plants, it's all of the animals, it's all of the people, it's all of the intelligence, it's all of, it's all of the things that people are thinking about. All of these things are your resource. If you're a nation, your intellectual property of your population is probably the most valuable resource. But what do we do with our intelligentsia? We kick them out every few decades and go, fucking fend for yourself, make some technology out of the shit
There seems
and
to be,
see if you can.
There seems to be like an underlying structure of undermining any attempt to bring that knowledge out to the masses, that something within the structure will defend itself and will try and stop that happening anyway throughout generations. So it's not like it's very easy to get that information out, because at some point you've got some form of sabotage happening from within the system.
Yes, and we have to ask, where does that sabotage come from? According to Roger Bacon, it's the fear of social destabilization that comes from exposing the unity of the disciplines. Now, that's really interesting, because all of our religions, every single religion that we have, uses codes and covenants that are directly associated to this matrix building construction, which is, you can read cuneiform characters off it, and you can read a lot of hieroglyphs off it. And yet, today it's very popular to consider that Sumer and the great Sumerian civilization came before Egypt, and that, it is the birth of civilization. Well, Sumer really only lasted 150 years. Cuneiform wasn't really fully fleshed out that early on. When you start really scratching the surface of Mesopotamia, you've got a system that is based on, Mesopotamia is the land between two rivers, right? It mirrors Egypt. It is the two lands with one river going through it. And there's a beautiful mirroring, actually, that, put them together, and you've got two extraordinary sides of the same coin in play. But they're at war with each other, really, because one can undermine the other very easily, and one can subvert the other. And you can actually see that there's a tradition embodied in the mythology which really disenfranchises the female by making the earth female. In the narrative of Inanna, Queen of Heaven, coming down from heaven and becoming the Queen of Earth, she is depicted as the daughter of the person who's got all the knowledge, it's Enlil or Enki or whatever. She gets him drunk. In getting him drunk, she gets all the information about the Mies, MES. Very important concept, really important concept, because that is the structure of the Kabbalah, literally, the Mies. If you know what the Mies are from ancient Egypt, hieroglyphs, we don't really get to know what the Mies are from the cuneiform or Mesopotamian tradition, other than in this dialogue about the descent of Inanna and the list of what the Mies are, which includes the rites of prostitution and all sorts of things that, you know, lead to a pretty well, it's literally the civilization of Babylon, really. It's like an anything goes, very hedonistic construct. And the Mies also include the, you know, the scepter, the rod, all of the things that you need, the Shen rings and so on, to build your geometry. But it's also discussing it far later in terms of how it's used to support a citadel, not a nation state, but individual citadels that are defensive units surrounded by a sea of people who are disenfranchised from anything that's going on in the citadel, that can come and go and engage, but, you know, you're under the control of the authority, and it's a very paternalistic authority. You know, women have a role as prostitutes, as seers, as mystics, and so on, but, you know, they don't have a position of authority that gives them the rights of contract status and so on. And these are really quite important, the distinctions. You know, when you disenfranchise the female, as Cato did in Rome, of, you know, the female wasn't allowed to engage in contracts. You know, you maintain a very paternalistic control system. In ancient China, you can see in the building of this mindset of yin yang, and really it's not that ancient, as I said, it's like post second, it's in the second millennium AD, which comes from the Taoist emblem, which is mapping of the ratios of day to night, but then it's mixed with the Confucian interpretations, or the Confucian sayings, which is around 600 BC, which are applied to the 8x8 constructs of the dyadic, triadic relations that inform the I Ching. So the I Ching is just 8 aspects that become the mandate of heaven, right? The Confucian interpretations are the readings. It becomes an 8x8 system. So there's 64 readings, and there's 64 permutations of hexagrams, which are made out of the dyad of the broken and unbroken line in triadic groups, triplets. Okay, so you've actually got all the guts of the Egyptian system. You've got your hexagram, you've got your dyadic triadic relation, which is your division by 2 or by 3. You've got also your relationship between the 2-dimensional design and your 3-dimensional architecture. And so, you've got the building blocks of a mystical system that embodies a lot of the ancient Egyptian information that is cobbled together, and it's a cobbling that doesn't really want the general population to have any information at all. I mean, the key dynasty, the first great dynasty, they destroyed the intelligentsia, they destroyed all the books, they kept 2 copies of every book to go into the imperial library, and the people doing it were illiterate. The people doing it were illiterate.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But they were doing it under orders of
Mm-hmm.
those who understood that when you disenfranchise the greater number, it creates the greater power in the fewer number.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're wanting to mystify the system, that is a means of creating extreme power in an elite group.
It's exactly what we're seeing now as well. It's exactly what we're seeing, just the misinforming of everybody, the teaching everybody things that are based on logical fallacies, so that we end up in a situation where we don't know what's up or down, and really it leads to what we term 5th generation warfare.
Well, it is. We've got to accept a logical fallacy.
Yeah.